Okay, let's unpack a massive topic.
Yeah.
The economy of ancient Greece.
Right.
We're not just talking about the theoretical stuff, philosophy and democracy. We're getting into the gritty reality of how this civilization actually paid its bills.
How it fed people, how it built those incredible temples.
Exactly. How do you thrive on such rocky soil? It's kind of amazing.
It is. And to really get it, you have to look at the financial foundation. So we're going to look at three main pillars: what they grew, how they got rich, and maybe most importantly, who did all the work.
So let's start with the farm. In just about any ancient civilization, the economy starts with growing food locally.
hmm
But for Greece, that seems like the first huge hurdle they had to get over.
That's absolutely right. I mean, if you just look at the terrain, the Greek landscape it's really challenging. It's mountainous, it's rocky.
So no vast, fertile plains.
No, not like what you'd see in Egypt or Mesopotamia. They just didn't have the space for these huge grain farms. They were always limited by the soil itself.
So they couldn't just plant endless fields of wheat. They had to get smart and use crops that could actually survive there.
They did, and that led them to master what we call the Mediterranean triad. First up, and this one is crucial, are olives.
Olives were everything.
Foundational. The oil they pressed wasn't just for cooking. It was their main source of light for lamps. It was even used for, basic hygiene. Liquid gold, really.
And the second one, of course, is grapes. Wine wasn't a luxury.
Not at all. It was a basic part of the diet. Water wasn't always safe to drink, so wine, usually watered down, was what everyone drank all day, every day.
They did grow some grain, though.
They did, mostly barley. But they could almost never grow enough to feed everybody. That rocky soil just couldn't keep up as the population grew, so they always had to import more.
And that scarcity must have had a huge impact on how people worked.
A profound impact. Farming was it was constant, backbreaking work with simple tools. We're talking wooden plows, hand sickles.
Everyone had to help out.
Every single person in a free family, from the kids to the grandparents, especially during the hot summer harvest.
So a lot of families were pretty self-sufficient. They kept animals, right?
Yeah. But again, the land dictated what kind. Not big herds of cattle. They kept smaller animals that could handle the terrain, like goats and sheep.
For milk and cheese.
Milk, cheese, and really critically, wool. They'd process the wool and weave their own clothing right there in the home. The whole base of the economy was small, demanding, and self-reliant.
But to become a real power, they had to break out of that. They needed money, they needed trade, and that brings us underground.
Exactly. If farming was the thing holding them back, mining was the engine that powered their rise. And it was, without a doubt, one of the hardest, most dangerous jobs in the ancient world.
This is where the real wealth starts to concentrate. The city-state of Athens had this massive advantage.
The silver mine.
The silver mines at Lordium. And this silver wasn't just for making jewelry. It was the raw material for Athens' famous owl coins.
And those coins became the currency everyone trusted across the entire Mediterranean. The scale of it is just fascinating. The money from that silver didn't just pay for temples like the Parthenon.
It paid for the navy.
It paid for their massive navy, which in turn protected their trade routes and their growing empire.
And that's such a critical link. The silver revenue let Athens change its military. Their fleet needed about 200 ships, these triremes, and each one needed 170 rowers.
And those rowers were mostly the poorer, free citizens.
Right.
So by paying them a wage, the state basically gave the lower classes real power. Their military service gave them a political voice. So the silver mines directly funded the growth of Athenian democracy. It's the economic bedrock for their whole political system.
But like you said, this wealth came at a staggering human cost. The labor conditions were about as bad as you can imagine.
They were. Thousands of people, almost all of them slaves, working deep underground in these dark, narrow, cramped tunnels, sometimes only 3 feet high. They'd work for hours and hours with just small hand tools. And the mine owners would often rent more slaves from other people just to keep the silver flowing 24/7.
That silver then allowed them to trade on a huge scale because, as we said, they couldn't grow enough food. So trade wasn't a luxury.
No, it was essential for survival. So they had to export their own specialized goods. They sold high-value things like that olive oil we talked about, wine, and their amazing pottery.
The painted vases.
Yes, those red and black figure vases were like status symbols. They were shipped all the way to Egypt, the Black Sea, Italy.
And in return, they're buying the essentials. Timber for all those ships, and most importantly, Grain.
Grain from places like the Black Sea. They also brought in luxury items for the rich, spices, silk, things like that.
But this whole system depended on the sea, which was incredibly risky.
Super dangerous. The weather was unpredictable, and there was a constant threat from pirates who would just prey on these valuable shipments.
So they didn't sail year-round.
No, trade was very seasonal. It was mostly restricted to the calmer summer months, which meant the ports, especially Piraeus near Athens, were just these incredibly busy, chaotic hubs.
Full of people from everywhere.
From every culture imaginable.
Yeah.
And because you're dealing with so many different people, you need trust. So they developed standard weights and measures to make sure transactions were fair.
Which brings us to the workforce itself. We have to talk about slavery, because it wasn't just a part of the economy. It was central to it.
It was completely integral to every single part of Greek life. The number of slaves a family owned was, the clever sign of how wealthy and important they were.
So it went way beyond just the mines and the farms.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the average household. Slaves did the cleaning, the cooking, fetching water, looking after the children.
And that freed up the citizens?
It directly gave free male citizens the time they needed to participate in politics, go to the agora, to philosophize. The celebrated Athenian democracy just could not have worked the way it did without all of that forced labor.
That's a huge paradox, isn't it? Freedom for some, built directly on the backs of others. What about jobs related to the sea? That must have taken a ton of manpower.
A huge amount. You had the men who served as rowers and sailors on the warships, the triremes. That was a core part of national defense. Then you had the shipbuilders. These were highly respected craftsmen. Their skill was vital.
And then all the work at the port?
Fishermen catching food, dock workers loading and unloading the ships. Just constant activity.
But you mentioned earlier that not all slaves were doing this kind of hard physical labor.
Right, and that's a really important point. There was a big demand for educated, skilled slaves. These were often people captured from other advanced cities. They might work as teachers for wealthy kids or even as skilled doctors.
And the city itself owned slaves for administrative work.
Exactly. The city used public slaves as clerks, accountants, even a basic police force. And because of their jobs, these public slaves often had a bit more freedom of movement than, say, a slave working in a mine.
It sounds like there was very little hope for freedom. But was it completely impossible?
There was a very narrow path. A few slaves were allowed to run small businesses and keep a tiny profit. Over many, many years, a person might save enough to buy their own freedom.
But even then, they weren't equal.
No. Even if you became free, you were still seen as socially lower than someone who was born free. You were sort of stuck in this permanent second-class status.
Okay, so let's move from the workforce into the city itself, into the workshops. This is where you see craftsmanship really take over.
Yes, the artisans. They were the backbone of all the production in the city. You'd find them in small workshops, usually clustered around the central marketplace.
And they were making everything the city needed.
Everything. Shoes, furniture, metal tools, armor, you name it. And these workshops had a clear structure. You'd have the master craftsmen who owned the place, a few apprentices learning the trade.
And some slaves doing the heavy lifting.
Typically, yes. And they were highly specialized. This specialization meant the quality was really high.
So those famous Athenian vases, it wasn't just one person making the whole thing.
Not at all. It was more like an assembly line. One person might shape the pot on the wheel, another would paint the detailed scenes on it. Blacksmiths were essential too, of course, making weapons and farm tools.
And the place where all of this came together was the agora, the marketplace, which was so much more than just a place to shop.
It was the beating heart of the city, socially, politically, and economically. Merchants set up stalls selling fresh food, fish, all the crafts we talked about.
But people went for other reasons too.
Oh, yeah. They went to hear the news, to do legal business, to hire a worker for the day, or even to buy and sell slaves. It all happened there.
And the government had to be involved to keep things from getting out of control.
For sure. There were always officials there inspecting goods, checking those standard weights and measures to stop people from cheating. It was loud, it was lively, and everything was about bargaining.
Let's talk about the money that made all this possible. Coinage was a revolutionary idea, wasn't it? It made buying and selling so much easier than just bartering.
It really was. And while every city-state had its own coins, the Athenian owl coin it dominated everywhere.
Why was it so trusted?
Two reasons. It had a very consistent weight, and thanks to those laurium mines, it had a really high silver content. So people knew they weren't getting cheated. It was reliable.
And that trust is where you see the beginnings of banking. You had money changers in the agora.
Right, little tables. Their first job was just helping travelers swap foreign coins for local ones, but they started to do more.
They started taking deposits.
They took deposits from wealthy people, and then, critically, they started giving out loans, often high-risk loans to merchants to pay for a trading voyage.
And if the ship sank,
The loan was usually forgiven, but if it came back full of goods, the merchant paid back the loan plus a very, very high interest rate. That's really the start of commercial banking.
so how did the city itself pay for things? For defense, for buildings?
Yeah.
You said they didn't have an income tax like we do?
No, and their system is fascinating. They relied on a few different things. They collected taxes or duties on all the goods coming into and out of the ports, and they got money from fines paid in the law courts.
But the most famous method was something called a liturgy.
It was ingenious. A liturgy wasn't a cash tax. It was an obligation placed on the richest citizens to personally pay for a big public project.
So you wouldn't write a check to the city.
No, you would be told, you're rich, so this year you have to pay to build and equip a brand new warship, or you have to sponsor a big theater festival.
Yeah. So they were basically taxing wealth by making it a public duty.
Exactly, and it played on people's desire for status. If you funded a great warship, everyone knew it, and your reputation grew. Only in a real crisis, like a war, would they create a special property tax just for the wealthiest people. Your wealth, your land, and your slaves determined everything.
And war was common. It wasn't some rare event. So it must have had a huge immediate impact on the economy.
Immediate and devastating. The first thing that happens is that farmers have to leave their fields to go fight, so food production just stops.
And enemy armies would target the farms, right?
That was a primary strategy. You'd burn your enemies' olive groves, destroy their crops. You're trying to starve them out to cripple their economy for years to come.
And the cost to the city must have been astronomical.
It was. Paying for an army, building defensive walls, it put a massive strain on the treasury. That's when those liturgies and special war taxes became absolutely vital.
If city was under siege, the whole system would just seize up.
Completely. Trade stops, the port closes, no more imported grain. Prices for food inside the walls would just skyrocket. It could lead to famine and riots.
There was one grim economic upside to war, though. An increase in labor.
There is. People captured in battle were sold as slaves, so that would temporarily increase the supply of forced labor. But even if you won the war, the recovery took a long, long time. It could take generations for farms and businesses to get back to where they were. So in the end, the economy of ancient Greece was. It was built on a foundation of tough agriculture, high-risk trade, and a system of forced labor. But that is what provided the financial stability for everything else.
Right. It's what paid for the art, the philosophy, the military power that shaped so much of the world. When you look at the Parthenon, you're not just seeing a symbol of democracy. You're seeing a monument paid for by silver that was dug out of the ground by thousands of slaves. Understanding how they paid for it all really changes how you see their world, doesn't it? Good luck with your studies.